Hello! Today we're going to be factoring ax squared plus bx plus c. And this looks very similar to what we did before, except you'll notice there's an a here. So we're going to be looking at polynomials that have a leading coefficient. For example, we are going to want to factor 2x squared plus 5x minus 12. Now, we cannot use the unfoiling method that we learned in the previous lesson because there is a leading coefficient. That method only worked when there was no leading coefficient, when the first term was just x squared. Also, we can't pull this 2 out as a GCF because the 5x doesn't have a 2 in it. In fact, there's no GCF that we can pull out to simplify things. So again, we're going to need a new method for factoring. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually give you the steps of this method first, and then we're going to follow the steps to factor this one. So here are the steps. We call this method the AC method, and it has 4 steps. First, we multiply the leading coefficient A and the constant term C, which gives us AC, and that's why it's called the AC method. Once we've done that, we need to find 2 numbers whose product is AC and whose sum is B. This is a game that we've played before, finding 2 numbers with a certain product and a certain sum. So this method is going to rely on a skill that we already have. However, the next step is going to be different from unfoiling. Next, we need to rewrite the middle term as 2 terms using these 2 numbers as coefficients. That sounds a little weird right now, but it's going to make sense when we go through an example. And then finally at the end, we're going to factor by grouping. Let's use these steps with this example so you can see how it works. First, we need to multiply the leading coefficient A and the constant term C. In this case, A times C is going to be 2 times negative 12, which is negative 24. And then also, in the next step, we've got to find 2 numbers whose product is AC and whose sum is B. Well, B is 5, so we're looking for 2 numbers that have a product of negative 24 and a sum of 5. Now those numbers actually end up being 8 and negative 3. 8 times negative 3 gives us negative 24, and 8 plus negative 3 gives us 5. Hopefully at this point you're good at finding these 2 numbers because you've had some practice. Now this is where the AC method is a little bit different from what we've seen before. It tells us to rewrite the middle term as 2 terms using these 2 numbers as coefficients. So we're actually going to split that middle term, this 5x, and we're going to rewrite it as 8x and then minus 3x. We've taken these 2 numbers that we've found, and they become the new coefficients when we split up that term. Now, is 8x minus 3x equal to 5x? It absolutely is. What we're doing is we are splitting up this middle term into 2 different terms. And the reason we're doing that is because now our polynomial has 4 terms, and we can finish by grouping. So we're going to look at the first group and the second group separately. In the first group, 2x squared plus 8x, the greatest common factor is 2x, so we pull that out front, and the leftovers are x plus 4. Now in the second group, these terms both contain a negative 3, so we can pull out a negative 3, and that also gives us leftovers x plus 4. So now when we look at the groups, each group contains a factor of x plus 4. So x plus 4 is the GCF amongst the groups. And then the leftovers, when we pull out the x plus 4s, are 2x minus 3. So in the end, we have x plus 4 times 2x minus 3. And we have factored this trinomial. What the AC method does is it allows us to take a trinomial and split it up into a polynomial with 4 terms, but it does so in a particular way so that these new terms allow us to use factoring by grouping. We could split this 5x up in a lot of different ways. We could write it as 1x plus 4x. We could write it as 7x minus 2x. There's lots of different ways. However, this process of finding this particular sum and this particular product is what allows us to split it up in the way that allows us to finish by grouping. I'm going to do another video after this that explains why this works. If you're interested, you can watch that video. But if not, you can also just look at the example videos to get practice. Let's do one more here. Let's factor 15x squared minus 13x plus 2. Again, this is a nice format for us to use the AC method because it's a trinomial and we've got a leading coefficient on the x squared term. So what we're going to do is we are going to multiply a times c. In this case, 15 times 2 gives us 30. And then we're also going to write what b is. B is negative 13. And we need to find two numbers that have a product of 30 and a sum of negative 13. Those numbers end up being negative 10 and negative 3. A negative times a negative is going to give us a positive, and negative 10 plus negative 3 gives us negative 13. So I'm going to rewrite this polynomial, but I'm going to split the middle term into negative 10x minus 3x. And once I've done that, we have 4 terms, and we can finish by grouping. If we look at the first group, the GCF is 5x. So we pull out a 5x, leaving us with 3x minus 2. If we look at the second group, all they have in common is 1. But what we want to pull out is a negative 1, because if we pull out negative 1, that leaves us with positive 3x and negative 2, so that our two sets of parentheses end up matching. Now the final step is to pull out the GCF of the groups, 3x minus 2, and then put the leftovers in parentheses, 5x minus 1. And so we end up with our final answer of 3x minus 2 times 5x minus 1.